All right, so I would like to welcome to the stage Dr. Jonathan Lundgren. Dr. Lundgren worked for 11 years with the USDA's Agricultural Research Service in Brookings, South Dakota. Dr. Lundgren started his own research firm to address the lack of connection between agricultural science and the end user, which is farmers and ranchers. His goal is to redesign agroecosystems to be more resilient and produce healthier food profitably by increasing biodiversity and reducing disturbance to farmland. This morning, Dr. Lundgren will speak to the science of whole farm health, the importance of species diversity on farm, and creating a roadmap for farmers wanting to transition to regenerative farming practices. Please help me welcome John to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here. Don't do a lot of these in-person events these days, but it's nice to see friendly faces out there, especially so early in the morning. You guys must have gotten up pretty early. That's great. I just really like this stuff. I don't know whether I'm going to cover everything that was just said, but in one way or another, yeah, I guess I will. I like to commit to things and then switch them up just to keep everybody on their toes. I thought I'd tell a story today. A little bit of a story, a trajectory of where or how I've gotten to where I am right now, and maybe a little bit about where we have gotten to where we are now. And then this afternoon we'll hit a lot of science-y stuff and a lot more data. So here we go. The road to regenerative agriculture. So I worked for USDA for around 11 years. It became clear that we needed change. And we weren't going to get there using the same approach as we've got, that basically has produced the problem that we're in right now. So I figured we had to get out of that infrastructure. All right? And I'm clicking, but I'm not getting no response.
You gotta go up top.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Can everybody hear me? Not online, huh?
And then
I see.
if you stay there, then everyone online can see between the blues.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh! I got, all right. My corral. Aha! I used to give this talk, or at least elements of this talk, a lot, and I'd always show this slide, right? And the planet's facing some serious issues right now. We're battling climates, we're human health crises. I mean, we're all wearing masks here, folks, right? Pollution is rampant. Civil unrest is, all over the place, and we're losing life on this planet at an alarming clip, and it never hit, right? I mean, we all hear about these things every day. But this last year, we were traveling around the country, me and our research team and family, and these problems are hitting home. They're becoming a lot more personal for all of us, I think, right? And so now when I say climates are changing, we had the worst drought that South Dakota's seen in a long, long time. Guys are going out of business kind of thing. We're out in California and working in the Central Valley. There's no water. There's no water left in Kansas. There's no water wherever we're irrigating, right? The water's gone. That's climate change. We don't know whether we should be wearing masks in South Dakota because Manitoba's burning or because there's a new health crisis. Christina and I are standing on the ocean, the Pacific Ocean in California. My son, he's 18, his name is Ian, he's out in New Jersey. And I texted him, I said, we're on the Pacific, but we can't see the ocean very well because of all the smoke. And he said, I'm on the Atlantic, and I can't see the ocean very well because a hurricane is hitting out of season, right? This is hitting us in so many different ways. I've got a 7-year-old who has autoimmune diseases, and antibiotics just don't work anymore, right? Wake up, right? It's time for us to wake up. It's time for us to start connecting dots that we just haven't been connecting. We've been slapping Band-Aids on in order to survive. Well, the Band-Aids are running out, okay? There's a dapper young John. Who would have thought, an aspiring young scientist going to change the world using science, right? And so I started doing everything right within the scientific world, right? I started following all of those metrics by which scientists are successful. I wish that I could speak to this young man a little bit more firmly, maybe give him a few bitch slaps here and there. Maybe things would be different right now. But we all have a road that we've been on, and this story is a little bit of my road. So I worked within conventional agriculture, right? But I thought we could do things a little bit differently. Yeah. Is there a different way for me to advance slides, or is this okay? Yeah. Then I started to meet these folks, these farmers. And I would get up in front of audiences and I would talk about predators and how important, the predator biology is and all of the feeding behavior of lady beetles, and the farmer's eyes would just glaze over, right? I mean, nobody was interested in this. This was something that academics really enjoyed, but it wasn't something that people could connect to. Farmers couldn't use this information very easily. And then I started meeting all these farmers all over the world that actually cared about what I was saying. And they were interested. They would bring up pictures of their dung beetles. And this was before regenerative ag was a thing, right? And these folks didn't know it at the time, but they were the forerunners of what is regenerative farming right now, okay? These were conventional farmers, oftentimes, but they were doing things differently. And one of the things that they said to me was that they didn't have pests. That's not true. That can't happen. I'm a professional entomologist. I have my doctorate, for crying out loud. I'm the expert on this topic, and I was trained that pests are inevitable. You always have to worry about pests. The best you can do is count them. And when they hit a certain level, then you react, right? You react. You buy a jug and you hit them. These guys were saying, no, we don't worry about pests. We don't have them in our fields. We don't have to worry about jugs in order to control them. And I said, that doesn't sound right. Next slide. So we started to go out there. I started to bring my team out there, and these farmers were doing weird things. They were growing conventional crops. You see the corn back there, but they were surrounding them with field margins of flowering plants, and they were putting flowering plants into their systems. And at the time, it was just maybe a rye cover crop, something real simple, right? It didn't take long before they were putting 9, 10, 30 species of covers out there. And instead of just you going no-till and employing cover crops, they were starting to integrate livestock into those systems. And suddenly we've got this forerunner of what became regenerative agriculture, I think. Next slide. Well, I'm a scientist, right? So we better study this. So I'm going to take my incredible tools of science and understand that we went out, we got a grant. And we said, you know what, these farmers, these are the leaders in this really crazy thing called cover cropping up in the upper Great Plains. We want to study this, so we got this grant to study whether or not cover crops could cure insect problems in corn. And so we went out to these farmers and we said, okay, you guys want to participate? Yes, green cover seed was a part of that study. The Burns boys, they had a little shed then. And we said, all right, well, this is the cover crop that you're going to be planting. This is, you have to replicate it 4 times on your field. You have to kill off all the vegetation using herbicides, and then you want to plant this variety of corn, and we're going to control, this is going to be just like on a research farm, because that's how we do science, right? That's how we learn about the natural world. And they started coming up with these crazy questions like, you know, you're planting a different variety of corn down in Nebraska than we are up in North Dakota. Those cover crops won't work in our system. We don't use glyphosate on our farms. How do you want us to control this thing? And the experiment completely crashed and burned. Because in all of my wisdom as a brilliant scientist, we robbed what was special about what those farmers were doing. And it quickly became clear to me that I was not the expert, not by a long shot, and that I needed to take we needed to get real humble real quick if we were going to study these people and what they were doing. And so the study evolved into something much different. We said, point us at the corn phase of your rotation. Well, what do you want us to do out there? Just be you. That's what we want. And then we want you to point us to a neighbor who's conventional and successful at being conventional. And then we want to study those fields too. Next slide. So this was Claire's study, and she published on this. It was kind of the culmination of about 10, 15 years worth of working in corn insect communities. In one day, this study rose to the top 1% of all science ever written in terms of social media impact. It was the first time that regenerative cropping systems had ever been studied in the primary scientific literature. And what she did that was so special was that she said, you know what, we are not defining as scientists what these systems are. We're relying on the farmers to design best management practices because you guys are the leaders in this. We're just observing what you're doing. It was a regional focus and it was on the systems, right? So there was different practices that were employed in these different systems, but there was some similarities. Next slide, or at least next click. There we go. All of the regeneratives use no insecticides. All of the conventional farms used neonicotinoid seed treatments. You'll hear that word more often during this talk, neonics. It's why the corn seeds or alfalfa or whatever, sugar beets are all different colors. They're not grown to be a rainbow, they're treated. And they were also genetically modified to have insecticidal proteins. Okay, next slide. So we went out there, right, and we studied these things. We got down on our hands and knees. We counted all of the bugs in the soil, on the soil surface, and then we sucked up any bugs that were on the plants, including pests. We also looked at yields and profits in each of these cornfields. Next slide. The insecticide-treated cornfields had 10 times more pests than the ones that saw no insecticides. Wasn't supposed to happen, was it? They didn't just abandon insecticides, they replaced insecticides and genetically modified crops with good management. And when you do that, you come out ahead as a farmer, okay? Cover crops, absolutely critical in this study. Next slide. Profits were twice as high in the regenerative cornfields compared to their conventional neighbors. Why? Seed costs were substantially reduced. You didn't have to pay for a bunch of traits you didn't need anymore. Number two, fertilizer costs were dramatically reduced. You didn't need to put a lot of chemicals into your soil to restore its productivity. You could rely on the way nature does it, which is plants and animals. Okay? And number three, they were often marketing their products more than just going down to the coop and sending it to Seattle. Okay. Next slide. We looked at whether or not yields were correlated with profits on these farms. They were not. You want to know what was correlated with how much money each of these fields was making? Each dot is a field, by the way. How much soil organic matter they had grown. Right now, we give prizes. We give prizes in the state of South Dakota for whatever farmer can grow the most yield on their corn. A well-trained monkey can produce 300 bushel corn if they put enough junk on it. That does not make you a good business person. It is balancing input costs with returns. And if all we're focused on is yields, then you're already starting the game a little bit behind the ball there. Okay? All right. Next slide. What became very clear to me, and this was a really important change in the way that I perceive entomology as well as insects and my own life, is that insect problems, insect pests, are not an entomology problem, and they never were. That's why after hundreds of years of, or at least 80 years of spraying junk on insect pests, we still have insect pests. Right? If insect pests were an insect problem, we'd have kicked their asses a long time ago. Okay? The reality is that if all we're doing is treating symptoms, that we're never going to get ahead. All right? What is the problem? The problem, an insect pest problem, is a soil problem. It's a soil issue. Okay? Next slide. So that was an important revelation. We started publishing science that said that maybe the current system wasn't exactly perfect. Right? That didn't make anybody real happy up and down the command chain at the USDA. And then I met these jerks, these beekeepers. They started hearing about science that said that insecticides might be problematic. And there was a guy in South Dakota that was actually showing that insecticides might not be needed, especially these neonicotinoids, which were killing off their bees. And I said, no, you guys, the data isn't conclusive. It's gray, it's not black and white. Some studies that are published say that the bees are being hosed by these insecticides, right? But others say that the neonics have no effect on them whatsoever, so you guys aren't right. And they said, no. Come on out to our beehives and you watch our bees die in front of the beehives. And then you tell us, as the neighbor's planting his corn next door, and you tell us that the insecticides aren't killing our bees. And they were right. They were right. The science was not supporting what was happening in the natural world. We were developing scientific questions and testing them behind our computer desks, instead of going out there and observing what was happening in the natural world and developing our hypotheses that way. Next slide. So we started publishing on that, and that really started pissing people off. We got a lot of attention for these publications, right? We showed that, number one, the neonicotinoids were not really helping farmers. The farmers were paying for these things, and they weren't increasing yields, and they weren't reducing the focal pests of the crop. And then number two, not only were they not helping, but they were actually probably hurting because they were killing a lot of the predators that were out there actually helping to control those pests in the absence of other management. And that these insecticides were indeed hosing down the bees. Okay? And we can link their nutritional status of these honeybee hives as a direct negative correlation with how much neonicotinoids we're finding within their nutritional reserves. So, huge problems. Next slide. And then we published this paper, and the USDA finally said enough is enough. You what? There are consequences to over-relying on corn production in the U.S.? This is a national security threat. right? It's something that we really do need to be pointing out, especially as a federal scientist. The taxpayers need to know this, right? And they had me take my name off of that paper. And that was kind of the final straw. When they start suppressing science because it's inconvenient for their agenda, that's not okay anymore. Next slide. Because there are consequences. Neonicotinoids. This is a work of one of my graduate students. We just published it. Another one that hit, I think, the 1% mark of all science in terms of social media impact. A friend of ours out in Montana said she was having problems in her white-tailed deer population. There was all these genital deformities in the male hunter-killed deer and these jaw deformities in these deer. And she was wondering whether or not insecticides might be causing some of these problems. And so a graduate student in one of the more challenging projects that we've ever run, it will never be run again by anybody. This was an incredibly hard project to run. Ran a captive deer study where we administered imidacloprid to white-tailed deer and monitored them for 2 generations. Next slide. This is Elise. She's a wonderful graduate student. She's actually here in Colorado now. I should have dropped her a text to see if she was in the area. And she administered 3 doses of imidacloprid, which is one of those neonics that I was talking about, in their water. Next slide. Imidacloprid in their spleens. The spleens was kind of the magic organ. It seemed like where we were finding neonics in their spleens, it tended to correlate with a lot of different fitness metrics in these white-tailed deer. The dead fawns had significantly higher levels of neonicotinoids in their spleens than the living ones. Next slide. Next slide. This was also associated with fawn body weight. Next. Fawn organ weights were smaller. That makes sense. Go. Next. Fawn thyroid hormone levels. Boy, that's an important one. We are significantly and seriously disrupting hormone levels in all animals and plants on this planet right now. And it is having weird consequences that we do not understand. Okay? Next. Fawn jawbone lengths were disrupted by being administered imidacloprid. Next. And the adult deer moved slower the more they had in their spleens. They were more lethargic. What's a lethargic deer in the wild? Dead deer. What are we doing? You think we're that different than a deer? Right now, this is on 13% of the terrestrial land surface of our country, the continental U.S. We're planting neonicotinoids. On 1 corn seed, there's enough neonic to kill 164,000 bees. What are we doing? It's getting into the water. It's getting into plants. It's all over organic farms. We've tested it. It's everywhere right now. And these are the consequences that we're seeing in the wildlife population. Next. So critics said, well, that's what you were able to generate in the lab. I mean, come on. What are we seeing under real conditions? You force-fed those deer neonics. Of course you're going to find it at meaningful levels. This is how much we were able to generate under controlled conditions. Next. We found 3 times the amount in North Dakota wild deer. Next slide. We tested 800 hunter-killed deer from Minnesota. The politics in this study are already becoming problematic. More than 60 to 100% of the deer were contaminated with neonics. Next slide. We looked at fishers, bobcats, river otters, all of these predators that are out in North Dakota. Tested 100 of them each. A significant proportion of them were positive. How is that happening? They're not eating plants, right? They're not eating crops, are they? Next. A lot of yeah. These kinds of studies didn't make me any friends, right? Well, it made me the right kind of friends, perhaps, but not within the current system. So suddenly I had this question, right? We got all of this data that shows, well, a growing amount of data that shows these regenerative farmers actually know what they're doing, right? Through some simple principles, following them and implementing them on their operations, they're doing some wonderful things. We have alternative data that says the current system is producing all kinds of unintended consequences that's really hurting society right now. Okay, why isn't regenerative agriculture, why isn't everybody doing this? If you can be twice as profitable doing it this way, why isn't everybody doing this? Next slide. And it got me to asking the question of whether or not, especially as I'm going through some trials in my own life, is science being used to advance our food system or keep it where it is? And that's an important and bold question to ask, right? Next slide. Science, I mean, yeah. So I'm a scientist, right? And it's kind of humbling for me to say, you know, science isn't perfect, right? And our belief systems and our influence and our opinions influence the scientific questions that we're asking, okay? The scientific method can be a wonderful way of testing those belief systems if you apply it correctly. But science is never black and white. There has never been a perfect study conducted, right? There's always a problem with it. It's not hard to find them either. Once you're a trained scientist, you can pick things apart pretty good. Well, you did this method just a little bit off. It doesn't mean there's always room, right, for an exception within the science. So how on earth do you make decisions? Well, you rely on a preponderance of evidence. You repeat the study over and over again, and you look for consilience of evidence through space and time. So science provides understanding if it's applied correctly, but it seldom provides truth. That's math, right? If you want proof, you study math. Don't study biology. Next. Next slide. Science is also manipulated. There's a really good movie on Netflix called Merchants of Doubt. If you haven't watched it, and there's a really good book that's pretty thick, but it's also a wonderful treatment of just how science is manipulated. Okay, the tobacco industry really helped to formalize this, and it looks a little like this. I mean, first off, you've got an agenda, right? You're trying to. You don't want science to come out to disrupt your plans. All right, you've got a product to sell. So what happens is that a scientist may come out and publish on something that you don't like. Well, science isn't black and white, it's gray, so you hire your own scientists and find what's wrong with that study. And it looks like junk science, doesn't it? Uh-oh, well, but now the spotlight is on, all right? So if science is gray and it's not black and white, then how on earth do we make decisions using science? You have that preponderance of evidence, and where do you get that? You pay for it. And science is for sale to the highest bidder. Okay. Until you attain that preponderance of evidence. Okay, so you still have this problem. There's this noisy person, this scientist that keeps on tapping on our forehead here, saying that they've got alternative data, right? What do? You destroy that person. You eviscerate them publicly. You destroy them, you destroy their family, you destroy everybody that they care about. And then you put their corpse on a stake for everyone to see. And nobody asks that question again. There's no incentive for studying insecticide risk assessment for scientists to do that, or climate change, or the implications of overinvesting in a particular food system. You get paid the same whether you count lady beetle spots or you address these more controversial issues. Scientists are project-focused, not problem-focused. It's too hard. It's too hard to focus on overarching problems. And this leads to incremental progress that are symptom-focused rather than systems-focused. Next slide. Grants. There's a shrinking number of research grants with more and more hands in them. And the entire business model of universities as well as other formal research institutions are dependent on these grant sources. Research directions, the quality of science remains good, but the questions that we ask are obscure. Next question, or next slide. That's a question that I started asking myself. What would happen if scientists started to listen to the farmers to solve problems that the farmers have already solved, right? That would be a good question. Next. So this is me, on top of the world, right? I had just met Obama in the White House for being named one of the top young scientists in the country. I was doing everything right. Next slide. I had students and postdocs galore. Next slide. Publications up the yin-yang. I wrote my first book by the age of 30. Next slide. Grants, I had millions in grant support. Next slide. I was advising the EPA, the European Food Safety Authority, in risk assessment of insecticides. And then I started working on those questions that I introduced this talk with, and everything changed. Next slide. And I started asking myself why. Why is it that I'm in this position? Why did I get into this to begin with? Because right now I'm trying to change the system from within and it isn't working. So maybe we need to fundamentally rethink how we strategize this and start working with the farmers that are actually doing it. Next slide. So I quit, and I quit noisy. Front page of the Washington Post, and I called them out. You don't get to suppress science. I'm sorry, but we need this if we're going to advance ourselves as society. Next slide. And we started something totally different. Grassroots science to change or start a revolution in our food system. There it is. That's Blue Dasher Farm right there. And Ecdysis Foundation. We're expanding into California more and more. Actually, that's an old slide. We're all over the place right now. 9 states, 2 Canadian provinces. Next. Essentially, we want this to be a national network of centers for excellence in regenerative farming practices and integrating scientists back into food communities again, because we're too far away. Next. Next. So, metrics that scientists assess their success by. Number 1. Next. How many papers you write. Next slide. Grant dollars acquired. Next slide. Graduate students trained. How many students have you pumped through the puppy mill? Next. Committees you served on. Right? I looked at this list. I was good at this stuff. There was almost nobody that had better stats than I did. Okay? And then I looked at this list. Oh, next slide. The only way that you get a job in this field is if you adhere to these metrics of success. So it's in a self-perpetuating rut. And I started looking at this list of metrics of success, and I said, you know what? How many of these things do farmers care about? Right. Right. So there's this schism, right? The academics, the scientists, are pursuing completely different sets of goals than what's important for producers. There's a disconnect, and that disconnect had become really pronounced. Next slide. So at Blue Dasher, at Dices Foundation, we're reintegrating scientists back into food communities again. Having relationships, we're practicing actual, we're getting our hands dirty trying to become farmers. We use metrics like how many acres did we change or affect? How many face-to-face contacts did we have with end users? How much social media reach have we attained? And yes, peer-reviewed science is an important component of that, right? But it ain't at the top. Next slide. So there we are. This is where we're at. Next slide. We started something crazy. Next slide. This is Blue Dasher Farm. When we started, we had 3 bare buildings, 25 acres of perennial grass, and 28 acres of wetlands and prairies. Small, right? That isn't a big operation, but this is the future. I dare say this is the future size of where the agricultural growth of the U.S. is right now. You don't see, the big aren't able to get much bigger anymore. It's where these young farmers are coming out, or farmers are returning back to the family farm, and they're working on small sections of that. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. First goal of what we were trying to do, we opened our doors based on a crowdfunding campaign, right? It was an Indiegogo campaign. And we reached out 6 seasons ago, and we said, if you think regenerative ag can be a viable future, please support us. And through small donations from all over the planet, they bankrolled a research facility in regenerative ag. I think that that's validation that this is a real thing, right? Conduct the science needed to drive regenerative ag, okay? That means a different way of thinking about science. Next. Train the next generation of science in farming, okay, and beekeeping and ranching. Next. And then demonstrating regenerative principles. We walk the talk. We don't just get up there and wave our hands around and tell you how you should be managing your farms, all right? We're there in the trenches with you. Next slide. So the first step in this process was to turn a milking parlor into a research facility. And we used the community to do that. Next slide. This is what we started with. It was basically an empty, rundown pole shed. Next slide. With holes in the floor that we had to fill in. Next slide. So me and 3 graduate students in my family started to renovate this place in order to try to make it into something more than that. Polish the floors. We got it all ready. We had to learn plumbing, carpentry, concrete, electrical, you name it. We had to become a lot more than scientists, didn't we? We had to become farmers. That's what we needed. Next slide. Yeah, so there's some pictures of the early days. You guys all need to come up to South Dakota and see what we built. But this is one of the pictures. Next slide. So this is where we're at now. We have a thriving research facility in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, that people travel all over the planet in order to see something that they've never seen before. It's a really exciting place. Constant visitors. We joke that as people are driving to Burleigh County, North Dakota, where a lot of good things are happening in soil health, they stop at Blue Dasher for a bathroom break. So we give them some honey and send them on their way. We've grown from having me and a few graduate students to having 6 doctoral level scientists that are stationed at key positions around the country. We have 3 graduate students at different universities around the country, and we have a growing staff. We just advertised for a new admin manager because I'm realizing I'm doing a lot of full-time jobs right now. But we're at a good spot in order to be able to do that. Next slide. The next step, after we got the science started, kick-started, is we had to build a regenerative farm. All of the equipment was new to us. We went with things that we could, that worked, right? We needed workhorses, cheap. And the farmers advised us in this. So throughout this entire process, this was really farmer-driven. And not just from the neighbors around the community, but from all over the U.S. It's really been a neat experience. Next. We have, as our products, it's an integrated regenerative farm. We do not use pesticides. We are not certified organic. We produce honey. We do not treat our bees. We do not feed them anything but honey. And we have a lot of dead bees. But at the same time, we're selecting for genetics that we're hoping can be the foundation of a new population of honeybees for the U.S. Lamb, our sheep are really important to us. Eggs are a gateway drug in order to get us into people's houses. Prairie seed. Poultry production, we really liked turkeys this last year. And our pork was really second to none. We figured out the pork thing pretty well, pastured. Next, all of the scientists, all of the staff, in addition to, a day at Blue Dasher is, there aren't any two that are the same. They start usually doing morning chores and then they come in and develop new spatial analysis models or analyze pesticide loads in dung samples from Kansas or something like this. So it's a crazy place. We got the orchard established through donations from a local nursery. They've been tremendous supporters. Next. And then this is our cropland, right? We planted this to prairie. We're farming annual crops in prairie, perennial warm season grasses. And we had to clean up the tree belt quite a bit through grazing. Next slide. The sheep, the poultry, the bees, the livestock on this farm have revolutionized it. We started as sort of a crop-focused organization, and now we're very much a livestock organization. We really think animals are a critical portion of this farm, and we enjoy them. I think it's a part of being human, is having animals in our lives. Next slide. Many problems. Tractors are not very forgiving. Next slide. Horrible problems. Horrible down troughs in our life to get this started. Things that we didn't think we could recover from. But we still here. And there was no instruction book for what we've done. Next slide. The third thing that we did is we started to restore our prairie. And what a gem. It is an unbroken prairie that's been there. It was solid brome grass, so we had to liven this up. I talked with the FSA office where it's under contract, and they said, well, the only thing you're allowed to do is spray herbicides. You can't graze it, you can't burn it. I'm like, oh, do you mind if we try that? And those things, and they're like, off the record, you guys know more about this than the person who wrote this book, or this manual, so go ahead and give it a shot. So we started to manage this thing, and it has come to life. We have plant ecology courses from the local university that come out to see this thing. It's really stellar. Next slide. Fire. What a critical tool that we are not using enough of. But don't use it too much. Next slide. And the amazing diversity that has woken up in this prairie is just spectacular. This is Christina. Next slide. I wouldn't be here if I just focused on the negative. I could have gotten up. I was angry. So angry. Right? I did everything I was supposed to do. I did it right, and I got shafted. And damn it, somebody should have to pay for that. But if I had made my life about that, if all I had done is walk around and fought, insecticides are bad, we're going to ban them, right? I wouldn't be here. If we hadn't focused on solutions, alternatives, we wouldn't be here right now. And Blue Dasher Farm is more than a farm. It's more than a data set. It's more than an experiment. It's a belief. It's a belief that little things can save this planet. That relationships and caring about our community can totally change everything. Next slide. And that belief attracts some of the most talented people I've ever met that absolutely inspire me every single day. Next slide. Family. Oh my gosh, family is important. Holy buckets. And we need to be prioritizing that. What an amazing opportunity to, do so many powerful things. That sense of family. Next. Students. Like this next generation of young scientists are coming in and are passionate about saving the planet. My goodness, I can go to a university departmental seminar, the students will invite me, the professors won't even show up. Sometimes. That doesn't mean all scientists, all professors are a pain in the butt, right? No, that is absolutely not true. These are valuable people that we absolutely need to be engaging with. But the next generation is different, okay? And they're really passionate about making changes. This is where my focus is. Next slide. Friends and staff. Oh, this is the staff photo. Oh my gosh, these folks. Last year we had staff that came in for the summer from like 7 or 8 states. It's crazy that they would move to South Dakota for that. Next slide. And the community, my gosh. And it's not just here in South Dakota, but all over. We'll run to California, Central Valley, and people will invite us to stay in their homes. The largest beekeeper in the world, he's my neighbor in South Dakota, and comes over, and our families interact together. Down in Kansas, we go down to talk with a community that's building to not just regenerate the soil, but figure out how to regenerate ourselves. And just one of my really good farmer friends, he's like, before this place arrived in South Dakota, we didn't have anybody to talk to, right? I was doing all of these things, no-tilling, cover crops and stuff, and the people, my neighbors, didn't understand what I was doing. We had nobody. And so now we have a Soil Builders Coffee Club that has done some amazing things. They've built a roller crimper. They built an interseeder that the whole community gets to use. So it's been, when you build it, people really come. Next slide. 1,000 Farm Initiative is the future. I'll talk more about that this afternoon. It is the largest agricultural experiment that's ever been conducted, and so stay tuned for that. Next slide. Yeah. The status quo ain't getting us where we got to go. Not on your farms, not for society. We need bold change. We need people that are able to stand up and make decisions and do something. Not just wave their hands around, but do something. So, please, if we're going to save this planet, do something. Next, change your own life. So many people have helped over the years. Mighty Arrow should be on this, and I'd like to do a call out to them because they're one of the local philanthropic groups that's been very supportive of us. Next slide. If you'd like to learn more, there we are, and I've got a countdown here so for about 13 minutes, so I thought I'd leave some time. Is that all right? Oh, you do? Let's open it up for questions now, and then I've got more stuff to load onto you if you really want it. More insecticide stuff to really ruin your day. Any thoughts, questions, concerns about what you've seen so far?
Yep, so we're gonna have people type in questions to Menti, and then we'll queue those up and they'll go on the screen. And if you want, you can narrate the question that pops up and then answer it.
Yeah.
And that's how we'll go.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so here we got the first one.
Okay. Poultry and pork, we graze them out, so they're free range for the most part. The pigs we keep moving. So we keep them tight, and then we move them every 3 or 4 days. We also supplement that with some grains and things like that from local producers. So we do not, we prefer to use organic when we can find it. Local is really important to us, or knowing the farmer is really important to us too. How did you enliven your brome grass prairie? Burning it. Yeah, brome doesn't like burn. You wait till the third node of brome comes up and you light the fires. And you do that a few years, but in one burn, completely changed everything. So controlled burns is the idea. We have a gas pipeline station that's our neighbors, or one of our neighbors. And I'd never burned, so I've never farmed before. I'd never burned before. I've never done any of this stuff before, right? This is all brand new. So the first year that we did a prairie burn, I kind of reached out to the neighbors. I'm like, yeah, so we're going to burn this grassland or whatever. And he's like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. It's a controlled burn, right? And I'm like, that's the idea. And since then, a number of our students and technicians on staff are natural resource management majors. We find that we get much better quality out of the natural resource management folks than we do out of the agronomy departments, because I think that they're more in line with our style of thinking. So they're basically applied ecologists. And I think we really need that. Certainly we need the agronomy side of it too. We need to nest those tenets and ideas behind managing natural resources within our food system. So that's what we did. It takes year one, we went from a depauperate prairie to one that had dozens of species that we had never seen there before. The prairie, it was just, the seed bank was just waiting. It hadn't been managed in 20 some years, at least 20 years, at least 20 years. And that thing just blew up. It was crazy. Markets for the products we deliver to Brookings and the surrounding community. We do ship our honey all over. So that's another market too. But we do a lot of home delivery. A little bit of farmer's market, but that's mostly just to kind of get in front of people. Our farmer's market isn't real strong. What changes do you think need to happen to land grants and research institutions to make I don't know. Okay, so there are wonderful people that work at these institutions. So I guess the first step is to support those people. Their lives are not always easy. Okay, the next thing, I tried really hard to work in that system. God, it is swollen. And I don't know whether they're ready to change. I mean, maybe there's such a loss of sense of mission on an institutional scale that I don't know whether that can be cured. And that's not to say that they're not wonderful places of learning and teaching, but I don't, the land grant concept where every university was given money from the federal system to do high-risk research in the public good. That money goes into the bureaucracy now. I mean, this is very seldom, the faculty see a sliver of that. 50% of most grants go into the bureaucracy. I mean, we're able to put 90% of the grant into an actual project. I mean, The granting agencies are going to wake up and realize pretty darn quick, wait a minute, we're getting a lot more bang for our buck from these little punchy upstarts. I don't know. I don't know. If I knew, I would have stayed in the system. I don't think change is going to come from there. I think they're going to follow, though. They are following. Where can an experienced business development professional get involved? Like, you want to be a farmer? Is that the idea? In a support role. I think the first, so, man, when I got started, I had a hell of a business plan. Woo! That thing was smoking. I was going to make so much money. And it took me 3 years before I broke even. And I think that that's true of a lot of small businesses. I think if you are a professional business development person, you need to get your hands dirty and actually do it for a while before anything that you write down on paper is going to make any sense or be practical. And that comes from my own experience, okay? Not that I was like a professional business development person, but I had a hell of a plan. And I was good at designing plans like that, and how to pencil it all out. But it's different. And that's the whole idea, right? That's why scientists have to become farmers. Is because we can design wonderful experiments behind your computers, right? And behind your desk, sitting in your office and get millions of dollars in grants. But they're so disconnected from the real world that it's kind of like, yeah, it hasn't gotten us where we have to go. It produced the current system rather than solving it. And so I think it's the same idea with business development. There's no trading for having crap under your fingernails. But once you do that, man, you have a powerful tool to be able to help a lot of people. How do you help producers overcome financial barriers with starting region? What does that mean? That means ag. So there's, good golly, there's a lot of programs that are available for beginning farmers. I mean, we bankrolled all of our stuff with FSA. The USDA started me. That was tenuous. There's a lot of financial programs for beginning farmers out there already. We took advantage of those programs. Maybe educating about that. Is land purchase the issue? I don't know. I think advertising and marketing yourselves, I think that those would be really powerful tools, especially for beginning farmers. Giving people a sense of community, that would be huge. Because right now you feel pretty isolated and alone, and when you need to get something done, it's pretty hard. Finding labor, that's not hard. Christ, I live in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, and we have no trouble finding help because we're doing something different that people believe in. But if you just say, well, we're going to raise corn and beans this year, or sugar beets this year, then you may have more trouble attracting helpers, right? So maybe that should tell you something about what's going on. Sure, yeah. Well, I could do that with data if you wanted to. Maybe we'll reserve this question if there's still time. I've got slides already loaded on the end of my presentation. What role do insects play in your farm system? Have you ever explored the benefits of insect frass in soil? Soil is insect frass. So frass is poop, right? For those of you who don't know, so organic matter in soil, I mean, yes, so we think of soil biology as being microbes. And that's true. There's a lot of microbes out there. The organic matter in soil is worm and collembola poop, for the most part. I mean, a good chunk of that. Invertebrates are a critical aspect of the entire agroecosystem. It doesn't function without bugs. So, and that's been kind of, I mean, when I first started talking to even, folks interested in cover crops and stuff, insects weren't really even on the radar screen. They were regarded solely as pests. And that's really, far from the truth. In part because I think there's so much diversity and they're small enough that it's a little hard to wrap your brain around, is this one a good one or a bad one? We're actually developing some new techniques that are hopefully, in order to implement the 1,000 Farm Initiative, we're developing entirely new technologies that should allow us to unlock that. But artificial intelligence image recognition of insects has been a huge financial and technical infrastructure investment that we've been making, such that we've developed imaging systems so that hopefully, and artificial intelligence image recognition, so that when a farmer takes a sweep sample, they can hopefully take an image of it, send it to us, and then we can poop out what kind of diversity you're having out in your field. It should really unlock the field of entomology for non-specialists. So yeah, they're every component, right? Life is every component. We always talk about carbon, right? All of these things, carbon, 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 but we forget, you know what? Carbon's life. That's how it gets there, right? You have to have life in your system. It ain't gonna come from putting out a bunch of biochar. It ain't gonna come from some other location that you ship in. I mean, we've been doing that for a long time. We've tried to import beneficial species, and then we drop them into a wasteland and watch it fail, right? Unless you're building the habitat, and the habitat is a whole system. Yeah, all of these ideas of just focusing on carbon are pretty short-sighted. Can you quickly mention what were the pieces of equipment you needed or found most useful to get started? Okay, so yeah, I can tell you all the mistakes I made too. Would you like to hear those? Well, we bought a big-ass combine, and I got that monstrous tractor that took out a barn for a 53-acre farm. What I would get, we still use that tractor, and it was only $10,000, so it wasn't a big deal. For as far as we need to drag around our seed drill in order to plant. So we have a little 10-foot no-till John Deere 750. We needed a tractor to pull it. Bobcat, holy moly, get a skid steer. That thing, I couldn't even get my equipment into these barns. The barns weren't tall enough. I bought all this monster stuff because that was my environment. That's what I knew, right? We've got, get a little gator or something that you can drag things around. Fencing, we use temporary fencing. For our sheep flock, a little livestock trailer would be really useful. If you can pull in some haying equipment or borrow it, I think that's useful. But those are the things we use the most on. And then we have a lot of, Scandinavian-rooted humans that have large, long arms that can lift things. So, what do neonics have to do with soil health? Neonics are the anti of soil health. They kill it. They destroy it. If you are trying to practice soil health on your farm and you use insecticides or even herbicides or fungicides, you are destroying soil health. So you either need to stop or you need to replace what you've just killed as fast as you can. All of it works in Boulder County. Every last word I said. All of it. That's why we're doing the 1,000 Farm Initiative. Because everybody says, oh, well, that may work on your farm, but not here. It's too hot, too dry, too cold, too wet. That may work there. Never work on my farm. I can't get that to go. Where's the markets? Until somebody does it. That's it right there. That's why we're doing 1,000 Farm, is to show it always works, no matter what you grow, no matter where you grow it. Can we get a Nicdisis farm in the Boulder region? Yes, we're trying. Yeah. So if you like that idea, talk to people, as many people as you can talk to. What species of cover crop are you finding established well at your site? Diversity. We follow, so green cover seed, and I'm sorry in advance, because this is probably not the most valuable product, but there's like this crap that's left over, like after all the seeds have been cleaned, like the individual species, and it's like there's piles on the floor of these random seeds. We like that. That's the stuff we plant, because we're after diversity and let it sort itself out. So yes, there are things that you could do probably to help hone that, but at the end of the day, you'll probably be left with the same situation that we're left with. So. With the current lack of moisture, are you watering, or is your program purely thriving due to regenerative efforts? The latter. Ours was the only green farm in Dual County, South Dakota. We were grazing perennial warm season grasses that were adapted to this. You know, they are deep roots. We were working with native vegetation. All of the annual stuff we planted, crapped out. That being said, man, it was a tight year. And I hit those grasslands harder than I probably should have. But dang it, what else was I going to feed them? We were running out of green spots. Thank God I had wetlands. Because if I didn't have those low areas, if I had used the mantra of fence post to fence post, hey, time to drain those wetlands, that is currently pervasive in the upper Midwest and Great Plains, we'd be out of business. We wouldn't have had anything to graze. Those wetlands are a tool. You have to have those low areas. That's the greenest spot. That was the only green spot on the farm. Or the greenest of green spots.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lundgren. That is it for our questions.
Okay.
Thank you, audience, for providing so many good ones.